My name, as you probably can tell, is Brent Leonard, and I'm a member of the board at Lupus Ontario, and I have the privilege of introducing our presentation this evening. We have a very friendly and familiar face to many of you. Dr. Tselios is with us this evening to speak about biologics. For those of you who maybe don't know, or by way of refresher, Dr. Tselios is with the Department of Rheumatology at Hamilton Health Sciences, and is also associate professor at McMaster University. In addition, he also oversees the Lupus Ontario and Matheson Biobank with his research team. Dr. Tselios, wonderful to see you again, and thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Brand, the pleasure is all mine. I haven't become an associate yet, still an assistant. Another 2 years for me to make an associate. But anyway, we're getting there. Thank you so very much. It's my pleasure, my absolute pleasure, to be with Lupus Ontario again for this webinar. We had this discussion a few months ago, if I'm not mistaken, and we were talking about what's happening with biologics in terms of the current situation in Canada and how Canadian patients will be able to have access to these drugs that seem to be rather effective in systemic lupus erythematosus, not only in the musculoskeletal domain, arthritis, but also for the skin and other manifestations. And we, the so-called lupus experts, feel that we have another strong weapon in our arsenal for this. So we'll be talking about the power of biologics in systemic lupus erythematosus today. Yes, these are my disclosures, and these are the companies, the institutions that support our research. Probably you have heard about this a lot of times. I won't be saying much. This is how systemic lupus erythematosus, lupus for short, is going over time in the vast majority of the patients. By vast majority, like based on our own studies from the Toronto Lupus Clinic, about 70-75% of lupus patients will follow a disease course that is characterized by unpredictable, unfortunately, relapses and remissions. So when we have increased disease activity, sometimes we choose to treat our patients with corticosteroids and or immunosuppressives. Then the disease activity will go down, hopefully. If this happens, we'll go lower with steroids, and then until the next flare, and then the next flare, and then the next flare. And they will follow this fluctuation of disease activity over time. Every time we have this and every time we use corticosteroids, we get inevitably some damage. By damage, I mean the irreversible changes that happen to the patient's body, and we'll discuss more about this in a bit. And we have seen early damage within the first few years since this diagnosis, and then late damage. Early damage is more or less associated with the active inflammation during the first few years of the disease. We are not able to put this under control, to shut down the inflammation quickly and effectively, and some damage occurs. And then in the later stages, the damage is associated with persistent disease activity. Some patients, about 10 to 11%, are not able, or we are not able to get them into remission. These patients tend to accrue more damage. And of course, from drugs that we use, particularly corticosteroids, that seem to be causative for about 50% of the damage that the patients accrue over time. How we measure damage in lupus? You know that lupus is a systemic disease, practically affects every organ system. And we came up in Toronto back in the day. Actually, they started working on this in 1990, if I'm not mistaken. They came up with this in 1996, and now we're trying to refine this. What is this? Is the damage index, the SLIC ACR damage index. Many lupus experts, an international agreement, and this has been validated again and again in myriad of studies. And we have damage from 12 different organ systems, from the skin, from the joints, from the vascular system, from the kidneys, from the central nervous system, from the lungs, from the heart, the gastrointestinal, and of course we have some other stuff. For example, if the patient has developed a malignancy, a cancer, If we had some gonadal failure with this, we mean the premature menopause, the ovaries to go off before their destined time. And of course, diabetes. Why? Because diabetes contributes to more damage over time. It's like an important factor. So based on this, we have like some numbers. All these variables have a relative weight. We put them on paper, we do the sum up, and we came up with a number. And if this number like is 1, is like okay-ish. If it's 0, ideal. The higher it goes, the more irreversible the damage, the more the damage and the more impact, negative impact on patients' survival. How often is this happening in lupus patients? About half of lupus patients will have irreversible organ damage after 5 years, within the first 5 years since this is diagnosis. And these are like 4 different studies that followed patients with lupus from day 1, from the first year, up to 25 years after disease diagnosis. If you check the first study, for example, this comes from the UK, all lupus patients will have irreversible damage after 25 years of disease. 25 years is a long time, but keep in mind that our patients start their journey like at around the age of 30. Like mean age in Toronto was 31. If I remember well, in the UK, it's a bit later, about 32, 32.5. But in any case, even after 25 years, we're talking about patients who will be like 55 or 60 at that time. And at that age, all of them, or almost all of them, will have damage. How is this happening? This is happening, as we said, both because of disease activity, because lupus is really, really aggressive, is really active, is really like angry, during most likely the first 5 years of disease. At that time, we usually see cardiovascular damage, like something from the heart or the large vessels. We see sometimes neuropsychiatric damage, unfortunately. And sometimes we see damage from the musculoskeletal system, like a vascular necrosis. Some patients, not some, about 10%, the truth is they have this condition, and about half of them will need a joint replacement at a very young age, like for the hips or the knees or something else. And then as the time goes by, we see more and more damage. And of course, after the first 5 years, we start to see damage that is caused from the steroids, from the corticosteroids we use still for our patients. If we want to quantify this, like how much is coming from the disease and how much is coming from the steroids, is roughly half and half, like 50% from the disease per se, 50% from the steroids. What is this slide showing us? That if we have this relapse and remitting disease at the very far right of the slide, I don't have my, okay, lovely. This is the usual pattern of disease activity in systemic lupus erythematosus. They will have a damage index of 1, so like one only item will be affected at the beginning of the disease, and then after 6 years, they will have 1.5 items. If you go to chronic active disease, to the 10 or 11% of patients who will not be able to go into remission, not even for some limited time, this damage will go up to 2. They will start with 1 and it will go up to 2 in 6 years. Is this important? This is important, yes. And I'll show you why. What is happening with the steroids? We said that damage comes with steroids. We did a study in the Toronto Lupus Clinic back in the day with patients who did not take any steroids during the disease course. So they were the steroid naive, as we labeled them, patients, and then steroid exposed patients. And we tried to match them for all the other characteristics of lupus, like when they were diagnosed, if they had the same age, if they had the same comorbidities, if all these were more or less the same, except for the steroid exposure. And you will see here that if you were taking steroids, you had a higher chance of developing damage even after 3 years, or 5 years of the disease, or 8 years of the disease. For example, after 8 years, more than 40% of patients with steroids would have some irreversible damage already. We said that this is important, right? Even one point is important. Why is that? Damage is associated with survival. Or if you want to see it from the negative anyway perspective, it's associated with increased mortality. And this is what is happening. This is the 10-year survival for patients who had 0 or 1 in the damage index. 10 years, 91% were alive. Okay. And then if they had a damage index of 2, from 1 to 2, it was 84%. And if you go to 15 years, the difference was even like worse. Like patients who had more damage were more likely to die. And to die like in 15 years from this diagnosis, again, try to keep in mind always the age at disease onset in lupus. Patient-reported outcomes, why? Because like more and more we talk in committees and study groups and task groups for guidelines and everything about the quality of life for lupus patients, and more patients are being involved in such decisions, in such papers of guidelines and recommendations for management. This is the physical component domain. What this means actually, how much you can do on a given day because of your lupus and how your lupus is affecting this. So if you don't have any damage here, SDI 0, nothing, no reversible damage, you can do that much. And this is like a great score. This is very close to the non-lupus patients. Yeah. The more the damage, for example, if you have like 1, you're doing less. And if you have 2, you're doing even less. And if it goes higher and higher, you will be doing less and less and less. You will be able to do less and less and less because of disability, because of pain, because of fatigue, because of all the other conditions that will affect your functionality. And of course, everybody's talking about this except for me. But anyway, we have to take into account the healthcare costs. Is a major issue, a major factor for healthcare policymakers. I'm not a policymaker, but anyway, I have to say something about this. If patients have damage, they cost more to the system. And this is like, if you have like an SDI, the damage index of 1, you cost that much, like 2.3 or 2.5, 2 times the patients who have no damage. If you have 2, it goes almost to 4 times. If you go 5, it goes almost to 10 times the cost. So patients who get damage are the most costly to the system. So this is like a major target for lupus management, to minimize damage over time and to maximize all the other good outcomes for our patients. How can we do this? We knew about the antimalarials, the Plaquenil. We have, like in Canada, we don't have the chloroquine. We knew about the immunosuppressants. We knew about the steroids. We have been using this for 70 years now or more. And we're learning more and more about the biologics. What do we have in the field of lupus? We have 2 biologics up to now approved by Health Canada, both available in Canada. We'll discuss under what conditions. One is Benlysta, one is Saphnelo, and this is the last time you will hear the brand names from me. We'll talk about the Benlysta. This is the first biologic that we had available. That's why I'm putting this first. We had this since 2011. 2011, it was approved by the FDA after a long series of failed trials in systemic lupus erythematosus. We tried multiple medications and we're still trying multiple medications. All of them had failed until 2011 when belimumab came up. What was the catch with belimumab? Belimumab, we knew that in lupus, there are some cells, we call them B cells. B cells, anyway, is a subgroup of the white blood cells that you see like in your blood test and everything. Anyway, some of the white blood cells are called B cells. They produce autoantibodies. And we're talking about these autoantibodies and autoantibodies and autoantibodies in lupus. This is what we're talking about. And these are the major like, troublemakers. These autoantibodies will cause like tissue damage. They will go to the skin. They will cause rust. They will go to the joints. They will cause arthritis. They will go to the kidneys. They will cause nephritis. They will go to the heart. they will cause inflammation in the heart. So if we know who's making these troublemakers, can we target these cells, the factories anyway, the producing factories of the antibodies? This is what we did with belimumab. It was targeting this thingy that is called BLyS, and actually, like BLyS, if we can describe it in lay terms, we can say that it's the food for B cells. So we'll starve them to death. We'll starve them to death, and then gradually, like if you don't take the first day, you may feel okay. The second day, you may have some stamina and power to do your job. Third day, you will start feeling a bit weak. After a week, though, you will not be able to do your usual stuff because you will be starving. This is what is happening with belimumab, right? So less reactive B cells, less antibodies in the blood, less damage. That was the theory. What happened in the trials? Now we're talking about an experience of 12 years with belimumab, multiple clinical trials, randomized clinical trials. These are considered to be the most reliable when it comes to the philosophy of evidence-based medicine. So we had this BLyS 52, BLyS 76, BLyS subcutaneous. They were running a trial in Asia, but anyway, in all these trials, patients did better compared to placebo. What is happening? We have discussed this in the past. Just to refresh your memory, what is happening in systemic lupus erythematosus? We have patients on one arm who are taking the standard of care, and we call it standard therapy or standard of care, or SOC or ST or whatever. And this consists of antimalarials, corticosteroids, immunosuppressives, and you can have all these three at the same time. And then you get placebo. Placebo, say normal saline, is running in your vein like once a month. And then in the other arm, you have like the same drugs the patients are taking, plus the new drug, the belimumab. Right? This is like belimumab and standard therapy, placebo and standard therapy. So we put them together, and we found that belimumab was working better and was leading to more remission, a high percentage of patients getting into remission over time. So it goes well with disease activity, first and foremost. We checked the number of flares and severe flares compared with the patients who were taking standard therapy. Reduction. We're talking anywhere like close to 40 or 50% less flares in our patients, and this comes from multiple trials. So really robust results. What happens when it comes to the prednisone? Why we say this? Because this is a major treatment goal nowadays. We have understood now, at last, after like all these years, that we need to go down with the prednisone. If you have no disease activity and you're taking like 50 milligrams of prednisone, for example, I'm giving you trouble. And even if you're not able to understand this now, and I'm happy because you're doing well, I shouldn't be happy, and I shouldn't be sleeping well at night because I know that I'm giving you trouble, and this trouble will come up in the next few years to come. So when it comes to steroid reduction, more patients on belimumab were able to reduce the prednisone dose by more than 25% or less than 7.5. That was the threshold, the level that we're supposed to be like safe, even in the long term, even for years of use. It's not anymore. We'll talk about this later. What happened with belimumab? We were thrilled to see that it was also working for lupus nephritis. That BLyS LN stands for lupus nephritis. That trial was published a couple of years ago. They had patients with lupus nephritis that were treated with this standard therapy, we said, and patients with lupus nephritis on standard therapy plus the belimumab. And this patient did significantly better when it comes to renal outcomes. So they had less deterioration of the renal function anyway, and less risk to develop end-stage renal disease and go to dialysis. We were glad to see that with belimumab. When it comes to safety, we didn't see anything outstanding. To be honest, we had the usual stuff, some nausea, some diarrhea. primarily like during the time of infusion and the few days after that, some fever spiking for the first couple of days, infections. Why? Because this is an immunosuppressive and we push further down the immune system. If the immune system is not able to fight all these infections, you may develop infections or more infections anyway than usual. But anyway, we didn't see anything like significant, anything to stand out from the usual stuff. I'll tell you, all this were coming, what I show you up to now, were coming from the trials that we saw like a few years ago or 2 years ago. This comes from the American College of Rheumatology meeting that took place last week in San Diego, California. And this is a study for 5 years in 4,000 patients who were treated with belimumab through all these development programs, through all these trials. Why I'm showing this, if we have many, many years of experience with a drug, we can say more things about the really, really hard outcomes. And the hardest of outcomes, what is the hardest of outcomes? Mortality, if our patients do better or not. So when it comes to belimumab, there was a reduction in the all-cause mortality. Belimumab is with the blue line, and this goes per 100 patient years, 0.6 to 0.96, like almost a 35% reduction in mortality when it comes to this. Infections, like mortality from infections. Why? Because this is one of the most common cause of death in systemic lupus erythematosus. No significant differences here. And then cardiovascular disease, a significant reduction of mortality with belimumab compared to the usual standard therapy. So really, really encouraging results when it comes to this. Okay, let me. I don't know why this is not going forward. Okay. And this was the same study for malignancies, for cancers, actually. We had discussion about like how, if we increase the possibility of our patients to develop cancer because we suppress the immune system. This is like, if you Google this, you will see this warning for every biologic and for every immunosuppressive, actually, that it may increase your risk of getting a cancer. Do we have data for this? No, we didn't. Right, that was I think in a way, based on the mechanism of action and based on the ability of the immune system to survey and kill quickly the cancer cells, but we didn't have data. What are the data showing for belimumab? We did not have any significant difference in malignancies in cancers per 100 patient years, and this was for all malignancies. And this was like how many malignancies they had in the belimumab group and the placebo group. And they gave some more numbers for breast cancer in particular. There was absolutely no difference when it comes to belimumab and other medications, no risk increase for this. So that was for belimumab. We know the drug well. Now we have a new drug for systemic lupus erythematosus, and we were really, really glad to have another option. It's called anifrolumab. Anifrolumab has a different mechanism of action. What it does, there is something called interferon here, and interferon we found out for years now. We knew, but anyway, now we managed to get it into a drug and like put it in a bottle and be able to give this to our patients. Interferon is at the center of the bad things that happen in lupus, and it can control multiple cell types. It can promote inflammation with multiple pathways, and by doing this, it can cause tissue damage. And what was the idea that if we catch this guy and we don't let him like do the bad things that he's doing, the things will get better, and that was proved actually. In clinical trials, the clinical development program was based on the TULIP-1 and TULIP-2 trials, and we saw an overall reduction of disease activity across both trials. They had some like outcome measures, the SRI-4 and BICLA. I won't say much about this. I will say that BICLA primarily is an outcome that takes into account even partial responses. The SRI-4 was asking for 100% improvement, and it's a really, really tough outcome to meet. The BICLA is more lenient. Even partial responses, like 50% response, is okay for this. So based on BICLA, anifrolumab did very, very well compared to placebo. And if we see these responses, it achieved this response, that BICLA response, really, really early as week 8. Anifrolumab is being administered once a month, like belimumab. So even after, if we have the baseline here and the second and the third, even after the second diffusion, we saw significantly better results in patients treated with anifrolumab. If we check the flare rates through week 52 for the TULIP-1 and TULIP-2 trials, I'm talking only, there was a almost significant reduction of the flares, particularly in TULIP-2, so less flares in patients treated with anifrolumab. And significant reduction in both studies for steroids. As we said, this is a major goal in lupus management nowadays. What was the good thing, anyway, the smart thing in the anifrolumab trials? The investigators, the designers, required a reduction of corticosteroids to 7.5 milligrams or below from week 40 to week 52 for the last 3 months, anyway, of the trial. So the sites that were like recruiting patients and had patients in the study were forced to go down with the steroids. And by going down with the steroids, they saw that they didn't have any more flares or any more disease activity. These patients did well. And this was really, really encouraging for getting lower and lower with steroids. What else was done with anifrolumab? Anifrolumab has the first long-term blind randomized control trial for safety and efficacy of this drug. So they had like the first 52 weeks, the first year, and then they reconsented the patients to get them into the long-term extension trial for another 3 years. And now we have data. This trial was published last year, about 12 months ago, if I'm not mistaken, and we have good data and reliable data for 4 years of use in anifrolumab. What happened with the steroids? If you see this, like the red bars here, patients treated with anifrolumab were taking cumulatively, like if we add the milligrams that you're taking in any given day for 365 days, we will have the annual cumulative dose. Right, that's why you see all these numbers here. For example, like 2,500 milligrams. Okay, that was not given in 1 day. That was like on an annual basis. And then patients with anifrolumab were taking significantly less and less and less corticosteroids over the second, the third, the fourth year, and so on. And I strongly believe that this will be, will continue to be observed over the years. What happened with disease activity, even with less steroids, right? We showed that these patients were taking less and less steroids. Disease activity goes less and less and less with less steroids. Why? Because these patients were treated concomitantly with anifrolumab, and they were doing rather well with this drug. What happened with the from the safety perspective? What can we say from safety? Right, we always talk about efficacy. Safety comes first, of course, for our patients. Do no harm is the first principle of medicine. And we spoke about the infections. Why? Because like the other drug and like all the drugs we use except for hydroxychloroquine are immunosuppressives. So we expect some more infections in our patients. What happened with anifrolumab? We didn't see much except for herpes zoster virus, influenza, and latent tuberculosis. For herpes zoster, we had 3 times more, if I'm not mistaken, like 3 times more cases with herpes zoster, with singles. This is herpes zoster in patients with anifrolumab during the first year of the disease. During the second, third, and fourth year of the long-term extension study, we did not see any such increase in herpes zoster infections. So why this is happening? I believe, based on trials we did from the with the Toronto Lupus Clinic, that this is the result of the reduction of the steroids and not the anifrolumab per se. So you will go down with the steroids during the first year. You're taking like a lot. You're more likely to get herpes, and then you will have less steroids, less cases of herpes. In any case, it's recommended that you will have the shingles vaccine before starting this drug, particularly if you have like other risk factors for this. What we mean with influenza, I won't say much influenza. We know all about this, like slightly more cases in the anifrolumab group. I will give you only the numbers, 2.2. That means like 2 patients out of 100 in any given year will develop like influenza. Latent tuberculosis, what this is. Latent tuberculosis means we do some like a specific test for tuberculosis, and this test should have been negative to begin with. Right, if it's positive, you're taking some treatment, some antibiotics for a month or two to get rid of this like assumed tuberculosis. If the test goes from negative to positive during treatment, this is what we call for this study latent tuberculosis. It happened in a few patients. They went back to negative easily with the plain antibiotics that we use for this. No significant issue for this. So both belimumab and anifrolumab showed like significantly better results, significantly better outcomes for lupus. Have we acknowledged this appropriately in North America? Not yet. In the other side of the pond, in Europe, they have acknowledged this, and they published this about a couple of months ago. These are the recommendations from the European Association of Rheumatologists, EULA, for the management of non-renal, systemic lupus erythematosus without lupus nephritis. And everything was the same except for this BEL stands for belimumab, this ANI stands from anifrolumab. And both of them are considered to be grade A. Grade A means with the highest level of recommendation, the highest level of confidence that these drugs will work, even from mild disease all the way to moderate and even severe disease. And in severe disease, we have patients not only with musculoskeletal and skin disease, but also with internal organ involvement. We can discuss about this further. What was the other major change in these recommendations compared to the 2019 recommendations? These things, steroids 5 milligrams or less. Back in the day, we were thinking that 7.5 is okay, is safe. It's not. And we know it's not. And we know we have shown with trials and my studies from Toronto that it's possible for the vast majority of patients, for like almost 89% of the patients, to go down to zero if we do it slowly, carefully, gradually. What is happening in Canada? This is what the recommendations that were published like 2 months ago. What is happening in Canada? What is the current situation in Canada? And I'm done with this. I will let you ask whatever you want. Belimumab is available since 2011, and anifrolumab since 2022. Asterisk here, why? Because currently, both drugs are available only under private insurance and under specific criteria. So even if you tell me, Doc, I have private insurance, I really don't know if you will be eligible for this, because like plans are different, things are different from plan to plan, and I don't know like if you have complete coverage or partial coverage or anything like this. And why I'm saying this, because even if you have like a partial coverage, say 80%, and you are required to pay the rest 20%, anyway, the manufacturers will cover the cost. But if they did not, you would be required to pay like $5,000, and $5,000 a year is not affordable for many Canadians. What happened in December 2022, that was like one of the best days of my life. I'll say that like the 15th of December, I was over the moon. Why? Because CADTH, the Canadian Agency for Drug and Technology, blah, blah, blah. I can't remember the acronym. But anyway, the guys who are responsible to approve this approved both belimumab for lupus nephritis and anifrolumab for non-renal lupus. That was the first step to get public reimbursement for these drugs in Canada. Now, negotiations for public reimbursement between the manufacturers and the Canadian government are at an advanced stage. I can't say more, but I will say quickly that maybe after Christmas we'll have news. Okay, you never heard that from me. I know, and I can say that in Quebec, there was approval for public reimbursement of anifrolumab about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I hope that we'll soon have approval in Ontario as well. So this is all from me. I hope, right, okay, we'll have like some time for discussion and questions and everything. I'll be more than happy to discuss about whatever you want to hear.
Thank you so much. We do have some questions coming in, and I'll just mention before we get to those, to anybody who wasn't sure really what to do, please do put your questions in the Q&A little feature at the bottom of the screen for Zoom, and we will be sure to get to it. So if you need some time to type your answers, go ahead. I'll read slowly through the questions. We'll have some conversation, so you have some time to get your questions in. So we have a question about how to choose between belimumab or anifrolumab for a patient, and is one better for cardiovascular issues than the other?
For cardiovascular issues, it's not like easy to make a choice when it comes to this. Why? Because we don't have data, and of course we don't have any head-to-head comparison of anifrolumab and belimumab. Now, it seems that anifrolumab works very well for skin, and it's my observation from my patients anyway. And I will publish this shortly. And from others from the UK, from some friends in the center in Lynch, UK, they showed like significant like improvement resolution of skin, even like refractory skin rashes with anifrolumab. Belimumab, on the other hand, is the one that is approved for nephritis. Right, anifrolumab is not approved for nephritis yet. We have some evidence that it's working. The phase 2 trial is out and is like promising, and we are waiting the phase 3 trial. But only belimumab has been approved for this at the moment. So it's tough to say what is happening. Belimumab has been in the market for 12 years now. We have some patients who transitioned from belimumab to anifrolumab. Why? Because they were not doing well, and now they're doing well with anifrolumab. We may see patients who will go from one biologic to the other, like from anifrolumab to belimumab, because they will respond. The mechanism of actions are different, and they may have different benefits for different patients. Another thing that I would like to say, and another thing is that belimumab is also available in subcutaneous form in weekly injections. So you can stay at home and do your injections every week without the need to go to a hospital or a clinic or something, right? Anifrolumab is developing something like this. The trial is ongoing. We hope that we will have a similar option for the second biologic as well.
That's a really interesting piece of information. That's going to be quite impactful for patients undergoing treatment.
Well, so for some patients, it's important, you know, like they prefer to be independent from a hospital or a clinic. For example, other patients I've seen and I've talked to, they prefer the intravenous administration. Like it's once a month, they can schedule this, they trust the other personnel there, the nurses, right, and everything. It depends on the patient. But anyway, we have the options, and having options is good.
Exactly. And kind of in that same thread that we were just talking about auto-injection and infusion, we do have a question about the efficacy between infusion versus auto-injection. I'm not sure if that's speaking specific to biologics or more generally, but if you have an opinion or some information on either one of those realms for infusion versus auto-injection.
For belimumab, actually, it's considered to be equal. Like from the efficacy perspective, it's considered to be equal. You can have your injections or the IV, the infusion. For some other injections, if I don't know if they're asking for anything specific. For example, there is for injections and in infusions, not much of a difference. Not much of a difference. I'm trying to think in terms of bioavailability now. Right, we have seen significant differences in orally administered drugs versus injectables. Yes, the bioavailability is like higher in injectables, but when it comes to any way to belimumab that we're talking about today, no significant difference in efficacy between the sub-Q injections and the IV infusions.
Okay. A question about side effects. So I'm going to ask a general question. So are there any general side effects to biologics maybe that individuals may notice or should be aware of? And then we also have a question in that same thread where someone is self-injecting Benlysta, noticing fatigue for several days right after the injection, and whether or not it might be related or why.
I have received these reports from my patients actually, like for some side effects that come right after the injection, and they may persist for 24 to 48 hours after that. But in general, they're considered to be mild-ish. I'm saying mild-ish because I'm not the one who's experiencing this. The patients are experiencing this, and they may have an impact on their overall quality of life, right? Like if you have scheduled to go out for dinner on Saturday night and you were supposed to have your Benlysta and you're so exhausted after that, I really don't know the impact of this. But in any case, I have heard this as well, yes. This does not mean that you will have like irreversible damage or something horrible is happening to your body at that time. And in most cases, we believe that it comes from the other non-medicinal products of the infusion, rather than the belimumab itself. Right? When you're taking a drug, you have something, you're taking some other stuff in order to make this like stable and everything. Right? And of course, it's like a different brand from patient to patient. I had a patient who was taking the infusion, and she was feeling sick for like 5 days or 6 days after the infusion, right? So it was something like significant. She couldn't get out of bed, she was telling me. And I was thinking, she was feeling better overall, but the first week was really, really bad. And I was thinking, like, am I helping her now or not? Like, what is the issue? What am I doing? I have heard the opposite as well. Like the patients will feel fantastic for the first 3 weeks. And then I'm saying, like, because both these medicines are being infused every 4 weeks, they feel fantastic for the first 3 weeks. And then their body is craving the drug during the 4th week. And they asked me to make it at shorter intervals. We don't have experience with that. I have done this in a patient. I took it like slowly to 25 days instead of 28. And now I'm thinking to take this to 22 or 23 maybe to help. But again, this is happening like off-label, that we don't feel so comfortable. We're doing this like to help the patients and like to come to a compromise with the patients. Right, but in any case, yes, we are saying this. Nothing really, really horrible is happening. If it's like tolerable and it lasts only for a few hours, like to a day or two, it's okay. If we get something meaningful, of course, after that, right?
Another question about belimumab, and maybe I'll just say biologics in general, but does belimumab work against other autoimmune diseases such as scleroderma?
That's a great question, actually. And there is a trial that is running now as we speak for scleroderma, and it looks like we may have some encouraging results. Why this is happening? Because we have similarities in the autoimmune conditions, like from one condition and the other, although they have some distinct characteristics, and we can say with some confidence that this is like lupus and this is scleroderma. These common phenotypes and common genetics and common clinical manifestations and all this. We don't have like the solid data yet, but for scleroderma, it seems that belimumab may work.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Interesting once you get a new treatment underway and you start researching it, what avenues it may take. Some might be unintended, but very beneficial.
we learn a lot. We learn a lot with this, and I think, from my limited experience anyway, what has happened historically is if we have a successful medicine, by successful I mean to make it to the market, be labeled, and be commercially available, money will come to researchers. Right? This is the cold truth. That money will come to researchers, and if there is money in the research laboratories and scientists and everything, good things will come up, and more things will come up, and we'll get to learn more and more, not only about like our disease of interest, lupus, but for other diseases as well.
And are biologics for anybody with lupus, or is it very targeted? So you lupus nephritis, you get this, otherwise maybe you don't, or how does that go about working?
Right. For biologics, when it comes to biologics, both biologics for the time being are only labeled for lupus, not any other diseases.
So it doesn't, then they're not specific to, you have to have lupus nephritis and then you can be prescribed. It's lupus.
For the moment, you can have belimumab for lupus nephritis or non-renal lupus. Belimumab. Anifrolumab only for non-renal lupus, not for lupus nephritis yet. The trial is ongoing now.
And are biologics a replacement to steroids?
This is the ideal, actually. This would be like the holy grail, to try to manage lupus without steroids. This is like a dream for us. Right, and both of them have showed good results with a reduction of the dose of steroids. And this, I showed you like a slide where the mortality from cardiovascular disease was reduced with belimumab significantly. Why I think this happened? One, because of better control of disease activity and less steroids. If you have like better control of disease activity, your doctor most likely, expectedly anyway, will start tapering the steroids until zero, hopefully. If you have zero steroids, you have like 50% less chance of developing damage. And with less disease activity, you will have the other 50% chance of developing damage. And if you don't develop damage, you will not have increased risk to die.
Do biologics interact with any other vaccines? So obviously COVID is kind of top of mind now, but what about other vaccines that are out there that people look at?
We have what happened with COVID and what happened with COVID and anifrolumab. It's interesting because anifrolumab was unlucky anyway to run its trial through the pandemic. So they had some problems like in what to do with these patients. There were 3 deaths from COVID-19 during the first phase of the pandemic, all in patients receiving anifrolumab. After the introduction of the vaccines, and all these patients, of course, were vaccinated, there was nothing. So anifrolumab did not have any significant impact when it comes to the vaccinations, at least against COVID-19. We don't have like any solid evidence, to my knowledge, for the other vaccines. If needed, we can time the vaccinations. For example, you will have your biologic now, and then you will have your vaccination in 2 weeks from now, and then you will have enough time to build the antibodies, and you'll have your next infusion anyway in 4 weeks from the beginning, or maybe like a couple of weeks later. We can time it in order to allow the immune system to develop all these antibodies that is supposed to develop after vaccination.
One other question coming in, and then it seems to have slowed down a little bit. So if people are still curious about asking a question, this is your opportunity to put it in the Q&A chat. So our final question at the moment anyway is, what is the incidence of malignancy over time for lupus patients? Is there additional screening for lupus patients? I'm not sure if there's a direct tie there necessarily to biologics, or if this is again a more general question.
That's a fantastic question, actually, and we have been searching for this, and I'll tell you something. Sasha Bernatsky is working on this from Montreal, like the major, the first author of multiple papers. What is happening with lupus is that lupus patients have an increased risk for malignancy. How increased this is? We're talking about anywhere from like 10%, say for lung cancer, up to 300%. That is like 3 times what a non-lupus lupus patient has for lymphoma. Why? Because in lupus and in other autoimmune conditions, the lymphoid cells, the lymphocytes are getting crazy, and they develop all this. They fix all these autoantibodies, and they rapidly proliferate in all these things. What else have we seen? We have seen a small increase in breast cancer. One, we have seen a small increase in uterine cancer, particularly the HPV related human papillomavirus related cancers of the uterus. And we recommend HPV vaccinations and anyway close screening of these patients for uterine cancers. The reality is that lupus patients do have an increased risk for malignancy. The good news are that treatment of malignancy is not different from the non-lupus patients, and the survival curves are not different for non-lupus patients. So even if this happens, you will receive the same treatment as a non-lupus patient, and you will have the same chance of success as the non-lupus patient.
Follow-up question that just came into that one. Should lupus patients be advocating for early screening for cancer for themselves as part of their routine follow-ups?
To screen for what exactly?
Screen for cancer.
Screen for cancer by themselves?
Well, advocate with their physicians to get more screening, more
for
proactive
cancer for themselves. What is recommended now is the screening for HPV-related cancers. We're talking about uterine cancers. Like for the others, we don't have any like more strict recommendation. For example, mammograms and ultrasounds and colonoscopies and all these things as the non-lupus patient. Yes, for uterine cancer, like the screening should start earlier and be like more systematic. Yes.
Okay, I don't see any other questions coming in. And we're nearly at time for this evening anyway, so maybe we'll leave it there. If anybody does have any follow-up questions, please send them into Lupus Ontario. media@lupusontario.org is the email address you can send it to, and we'll get you answers as best we can. So again, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Tselios, and everybody this evening. This has been really, really interesting, and I always love the Q&A conversation after.
It was my pleasure. Me too. Me too. Actually, I think this is the most lively part of the evening, right?
It's certainly the most interactive piece. We don't have the cameras to see everybody when we use the webinar feature, unfortunately.
I really enjoy this. You know, sometimes I don't feel comfortable because like we don't have like solid data and I can't give a yes or no answer. Right. I saw, if I'm not mistaken, like, okay, we have 4 minutes, something about a biosimilar. And if we may have a biosimilar.
That was my question, Dr. Tselios. It's Linda.
Linda.
I couldn't get to the Q&A, I think because somebody made me a host. Yeah, and I just wondered, like, I don't know what the patent is on belimumab, but would you see there being a biosimilar for that one in the near future, which would lower the cost?
That's a great question. Like that would lower the cost significantly. My issue is like from the commercial perspective, how successful this would be.
Yeah.
Right. We have about 500 patients with belimumab in Canada now, as we speak. And the question is, like, if any given company would invest, like in the production line or something for these numbers, and with the cost of, if I'm not mistaken, it should be like 20% less than the prototype. I really don't know what the profit will be.
I see. Yeah.
I'm really eager, Linda, to see the final cost after the negotiations with the government.
Right.
right? And as I said, I think that we will have news after the holidays for public reimbursement in Ontario. So we'll get to learn more, right?
Mhm.
I'm thinking that, you know, for adalimumab, for example, anyway, brand name Humira. Okay, I said adalimumab is the most successful commercially, economically drug in human history, right? We have 8 biosimilars in Canada because they have multiple indications, like rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, blah, 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 blah. And then like thousands of patients on that, right? This makes sense. That's why we had like 8 companies like making a biosimilar adalimumab, and all of them are selling, right? I don't know like the exact numbers anyway, but it seems to me that they all make a profit. Like the lupus community is not so big, but we are unique. We have special characteristics. We are lovely, all of us, and that's why they're jealous of us. Okay.
Excellent. Well, we'll hope for maybe a late Christmas gift on some news in the new year then.
Maybe. I'm really looking forward to that, Brent. Like
Excellent. Well,
I have worked a lot for that, and Linda knows, and we prepare letters for the government and clinician input and advocacy and everything. I'm really looking forward to that.
we'll keep our fingers crossed and our ears wide open for good news.
Exactly.
Okay, well, thank you again very much for this and taking the time this evening. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much. Good to see you again, Brent.
Good to see you as well. Stay healthy, and same to all of you joining us. Stay healthy. Good of you to spend your evening with us. We really appreciate it. And stay tuned for more webinars and events with us in the future. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Good night.